The Last Day of Death Row Inmate Saddam Hussein. What They Never Told You. In the shadows of a crumbling regime, behind thick concrete walls and guarded silence, Saddam Hussein, once the most feared man in Iraq, faced a fate he long denied: his own death. On December 30th, 2006, the dictator who ruled with brutal force and absolute control walked quietly toward the gallows. But what really happened in those final 24 hours? What did Saddam say? Who did he see? And how did a man responsible for decades of terror prepare for his final breath? From the quiet moments of personal reflection to the chilling symbolism of his execution site, once his own torture prison, this is a story of power lost, dignity staged, and a nation still trembling in the aftermath. Today, we take you hour by hour through the last day of Saddam Hussein's life. The decisions, the silence, the cold efficiency of justice, or was it revenge? Let's uncover what truly happened in those final haunting moments. Dear friends, on December 29, 2006, Saddam Hussein woke up knowing little about what the next 24 hours would bring. At 4:45 a.m., in a heavily guarded cell, once part of his own lavish palace, the former Iraqi dictator opened his eyes to the final dawn of his life. His body had grown frail, his hair almost entirely gray, but his presence still carried the shadow of the man who once ruled Iraq with fear and iron fists. Outside his cell, U.S. soldiers, an elite team nicknamed the Super 12, moved with a quiet tension. They had guarded him for months and knew his daily routines, but this morning felt different. There were no jokes, no casual remarks, only silence. The order for his execution had been confirmed. Saddam, however, remained calm, unaware that the countdown had begun. The first signs that his time was running out came not from the guards, but from the details around him. His personal belongings had been collected. His legal team had made one last visit. Even his half-brothers were allowed to see him, a rare, almost ceremonial gesture that hinted the end was near. Saddam ate his breakfast with surprising appetite, opening the simple prison meal and joking, "I've grown fat like an American." It was a small, defiant laugh, the last one he would ever have. By the early hours of December 30th, the world outside his prison walls was bracing for the event. News had begun spreading through Baghdad. Crowds were forming, some waiting to celebrate, others filled with unease. The execution wasn't just the end of a man, it was the closing chapter of a turbulent era that had left Iraq divided and bleeding. For many, this day carried a heavy question. Would Saddam's death bring justice or ignite more chaos? At around 3 a.m., the lights in Saddam's cell flickered on. First Lieutenant Andre Jackson entered with an Iraqi interpreter who had spent over a year working with Saddam. "It's time," Jackson said firmly. Saddam looked up, his face calm. "I've been sentenced to death before," he replied. There was no trembling in his voice, no visible fear. He rose without assistance, his movements deliberate, as if rehearsing his final act of control. Saddam was allowed a few private moments to prepare. He walked to the sink, splashed water on his face, and combed his thinning hair. He opened a small locker, searching for a particular pair of socks. When he couldn't find them, the guards helped him sift through his folded clothes, books, and papers until they appeared. Saddam nodded his thanks, his composure unbroken. Then, almost ceremoniously, he took off the watch he had worn during his trial, a silver Raymond Weil, and held it for a moment. Turning to one of the guards, he said, "My friend, take this." The guard hesitated, unsure if he should accept. Saddam smiled faintly. "No one will know, just you and me," and fastened it around the soldier's wrist. It was an oddly human moment, a quiet gesture from a man who knew he was leaving everything behind. He then changed into a dark suit, sharp and formal, as though dressing for a final appearance before the world. The finishing touch was cologne so much that one guard later remarked, "You could smell him down the hall." When he stepped out of his cell, the Super 12 stood ready. Saddam paused, looked each soldier in the eye, and said, "You've become more family to me than any Iraqi." One by one, he shook their hands. Some guards turned away, unable to meet his gaze. Others returned the gesture, visibly moved by the unexpected dignity of the moment. As dawn approached, Saddam was escorted to a U.S. Army helicopter. Baghdad stretched below him, silent, cold, and tense. He stared out the window during the flight, but his face revealed nothing of what he was thinking. Their destination was Camp Justice, a grim facility that once served as a torture site under Saddam's regime. Now, it would serve as the place of his execution, a deliberate and symbolic choice. Inside Camp Justice, the atmosphere was heavy. The gallows, an old military building converted into an execution chamber, stood ready. A thick black rope hung from the ceiling above a trapdoor. The room was filled with Iraqi officials, many of whom had suffered under Saddam's rule. American soldiers were not allowed inside the chamber. This was Iraq's moment, Iraq's law. Saddam walked into the room with the Quran in one hand. He refused to wear the hood, insisting on facing his executioners directly. The judge read out the charges, crimes that had defined his brutal reign. Saddam said little, standing tall and silent. Then, just before the final moment, the atmosphere shifted. Some officials began chanting, "Maqtada! Maqtada!" a reference to the Shiite cleric Muqtada al-Sadr, one of Saddam's fiercest enemies. The chants were not part of the formal process. They were meant to provoke him. Saddam looked at them sharply and said, "Is this your bravery?" Someone shouted back, "Go to hell!" Saddam replied coldly, "The hell is Iraq." As the executioners moved closer, Saddam began reciting the Shahada, the Islamic Declaration of Faith, point 1. His voice was steady, unwavering, as he said, "There is no God but God, and Muhammad is his messenger." The final words were still on his lips when the trapdoor opened. Outside, the soldiers heard the thud and the sudden silence. One later said, "You see it in movies, but when it's real, when the rope is real, it changes everything." Within moments, the news spread across Baghdad. Celebratory gunfire echoed in some neighborhoods, while others were filled with uneasy quiet. Cars honked, people shouted, and emotion spilled into the streets. For some, this was justice long overdue. For others, it was revenge disguised as law. And for many Iraqis, it was simply another step deeper into the chaos that had consumed their country. The Super 12 returned to base in silence. No one spoke, no one celebrated. A few guards admitted later that Saddam had unsettled them not because of who he was, but because of how he faced his death. One soldier said, "He didn't die like a monster. He died like a man who knew he had no moves left." In the days that followed, Iraq was anything but calm. Sectarian violence escalated, with car bombs and militias filling the void of power left behind. Saddam's execution was supposed to mark the end of an era, but instead, it became a turning point that revealed just how fractured the nation remained. For years, Saddam Hussein ruled with brutality and fear, and his name became synonymous with oppression, point 2. But his final 24 hours showed a different side. A man stripped of power, yet holding on to his dignity until the last breath. Whether one views his death as justice, vengeance, or a warning, the truth is that it didn't heal Iraq's wounds. The rope stopped a man, but not the war. This is the haunting legacy of Saddam's last day, a story of power, downfall, and the eerie calm of a man who knew his time had run out. Saddam Hussein's final 24 hours were marked not by chaos, but by eerie calm. A dictator once feared across a nation, he faced his death with quiet control, composed, deliberate, even human. But while his body was buried, and the execution declared justice by many, the deeper wounds of Iraq remained untouched. The silence that followed the drop of the rope did not bring peace. Instead, it echoed across a country still fractured by sectarian violence, mistrust, and decades of pain. His death served as a symbol of justice to some, of vengeance to others, but it was not a cure. In many ways, Saddam's execution was not an end, but the beginning of another chapter of unrest. And so we're left asking, does the fall of a tyrant ever truly bring closure, or does it only awaken ghosts buried beneath the surface? Let us know your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime and history stories.